Hello and welcome to more of this. We take a look now at this. Bottom-up development. Development is something which should be and is done by the people, not something done to them by external forces. When external forces try to run development like this, success is always very limited. If external forces want to help, they should be empowering communities rather than dictating to them. Listen, listen, listen. Ask lots of questions and don't assume that you're some kind of expert, even if you've got fancy letters after your name and wear a suit. See what local people are already trying to do and ask them what help they need with this. Don't impose top-down solutions. The World Bank fails partly because it has top-down solutions and one-size-fits-all solutions and focuses on big projects such as dams, which often turn out to be white elephants and environmentally destructive. And partly because it is, at least in part, whether it has been co-opted by nefarious interests or whether this is the main part of its nature in the first place, an organ of Western economic colonialism, i.e., maintain colonial-era economic relationships in which poor countries are kept subordinate to the demands of rich countries and exploit them for cheap resources without allowing the countries to develop and catch up with us. Thus, the World Bank cannot be trusted as a development institution. It might give with one hand, but it takes a very great deal away too. How much of this is down to incompetence, and how much is due to the influence of people in the West who want to use the bank as a means of extracting wealth from the poor world is up for debate. Development should be ecologically sustainable. It should be based on solidarity, although there might be competition between small businesses, for example. There should be a strong sense of community and mutual aid between communities. Ideas for a post-capitalist world should inform thinking about development. So, if you're trying to help empower communities to do their own thing, you shouldn't let this degenerate into trying to impose capitalism on them, which is something else. Next one. Be wary of intellectual property. Intellectual property rights. In many cases, the inventor gets very little because they're obliged to surrender anything invented to the corporation they work for. Some use of intellectual property rights can encourage innovation, but too much stifles the kind of innovation which takes place at the grassroots level or which emerges from piecemeal improvements or informal sharing of ideas. It's a myth that people wouldn't bother innovating if they weren't going to become a millionaire from it. In many cases, public knowledge, such as that developed in universities, or through the development of traditional practices through the ages, comprises the main part of an invention, and some corporation comes along, makes one minor alteration, and then stamps its name on the whole thing. Thus, there's actually an intellectual property land grab from the commons going on. All today's developed countries flouted the intellectual property rights of businesses in other countries during the industrialization phase of their development. This enabled technology transfer and developmental catching up. We are now preventing today's developing countries from doing the same by charging them hefty royalties that they can't afford. The result is greater profits for our corporations in the short run, but preventing poverty alleviation for poor countries and preventing development which will benefit all countries in the long run. Be wary of genetic modification. The main issue with GM is corporate control of the food chain. We have always manipulated nature in some way or other, and used our discoveries about the nature of nature, to innovate new technologies and prosper. Discovering genetic modification is like discovering fire or nuclear physics. It's a very powerful technology and should be handled with care, not undertaken lightly. Some people oppose all GM on principle. I don't think we need to oppose all possible GM. It really depends what we do with it. But we do need to know what we're doing, because there is the potential to unleash ecological disaster, which could lead not only to the destruction of nature, but to the downfall of human civilization, seeing as we utterly depend on nature for our survival. Make no mistake, we are playing with fire. Corporate domination of the food chain. Farmers have always saved seeds and swapped them, and genetic intellectual property has always been part of the collective commons. We are witnessing a new enclosure of the commons as corporations now claim ownership of the genetic makeup of seeds. Corporations genetically modify seeds in order to withstand higher doses of pesticides and herbicides. Thus, yields are increased, but at the cost of using large doses of toxic chemicals. Farmers are then banned from saving these seeds. They need to buy them every year from the corporations such as Monsanto, which own the genetic makeup of the modified seeds. This leads to a relationship of exploitation and dependency, and lack of autonomy of farmers from biotech firms. Farmers' health is harmed by the excessive use of pesticides and herbicides required to use the new seeds. The purpose of the new seeds is to increase yield by increasing doses of pesticides and herbicides, which is not sustainable. Consumers' health may also be harmed by this increased spraying of chemicals on crops. This isn't the only potential use of GM, but it is the major one that is being undertaken at the moment. GM is leading to an intensified reliance on the monoculture model of agriculture at a time when we should be moving towards more ecological forms of farming. In permaculture and many traditional forms of agriculture, different crops are grown together in a way where one provides nutrients for another, one provides shade for another, and they defend each other from pests and weeds. This is what we should be doing, not dousing the whole field in petrochemicals. The GM model is not financially sustainable for farmers. Many farmers in India and elsewhere are committing suicide by drinking the pesticides they've been spraying on their crops, for the reason that buying the expensive patented seeds and all the chemical inputs from the biotech firms has got them into large amounts of debt. The biotech firms are reaping the profits but not bearing the risks. Farmers are taking all the risk and thus ending up hopelessly in debt. The main problems with GM are patenting of life. Life has evolved over billions of years. Biotech firms come along, make one alteration, and then claim ownership over the whole gene. Life should be part of the commons, not privatised for corporate gain. If we come to rely on a small number of GM strains, we lose the enormous gene pool of seeds which had been developed over thousands of years by the global community of farmers. Reliance on a vastly increased use of toxic chemicals. GM doesn't have to be used for this, so this isn't a reason to oppose GM in and of itself, but it is the way GM is predominantly being used right now, and so this is the problem with it at this point in time. We don't know what we're letting out of the box. Playing with GM is like playing with fire. We could cause untold ecological damage, which will impact us in ways which we can't foresee.